Hello, everyone. Welcome to I Watch Horror. My name is Matt, and today I'm breaking down Urban Legend. Before we get started, here is your spoiler warning. I'm literally going to tell you who the killer is in like 2 minutes. So if you've not seen the film, pause this, go watch it, and come back. Lastly, if you would like to help a fellow horror fan grow his channel, please like, subscribe, and let me know what you think about this breakdown in the comments. I would very much appreciate it. Now, let's get to the breakdown. The film starts with Pendleton University student Michelle Mancini driving in the rain. She's listening to Under the Covers with Sasha on WZAB, the voice of Pendleton University. Sasha, who's played by Tara Reid, is talking to a fellow student named Jane who's been stealing her roommate's birth control pills and replacing them with baby aspirin. Her roommate is now pregnant, and she's worried about finding a new roommate so late in the semester. This birth control swap is the first urban legend referenced in the film. In most variations of the tale, a mother catches her daughter in the act and goes on to lecture her about having sex without taking precautions. The daughter responds that she has been taking precautions as she's been using her mother's birth control and replacing it with baby aspirin. Of course, soon after, the mother ends up pregnant. Back in the car, Michelle reaches into her back seat and we can briefly see the fur-lined coat that the killer uses throughout the film. After rewatching this a number of times, I'm fairly certain that this is without a doubt the most popular coat at Pendleton University. There are also a number of tapes and textbooks in the back, but I wasn't able to make any out. If you can spot any, please let me know what they are in the comments. While Michelle is distracted, she drifts into oncoming traffic and has to swerve to miss a car. Flustered, she plays Total Eclipse of the Heart by Bonnie Tyler. This song was released in 1983 and, fun fact, was originally written as a vampire love song. The lyric "Turn Around" is featured prominently in the song and is a subtle nod that Michelle needs to turn around. If you watch closely, you can see the killer moving in the back seat. Michelle then passes a well-lit and busy gas station, but immediately after, her fuel gauge takes a nosedive and we see a low fuel alert on her dash. She's just able to reach another gas station, but this one is decidedly less well-lit and not at all busy. Michelle is then jump scared by the gas station attendant, whose name we later learn is Michael McDonnell. He is played by the amazing Brad Dourif. He has a noticeable stutter, and after Michelle gives him her credit card, she calls him a freak show. He starts to fuel the car, and while doing so, glances into the back seat. He clearly sees someone and tries to think of a way to alert Michelle without alerting the killer. He runs the card and returns to tell Michelle that the credit card company is on the phone and asks her to come inside. She is understandably suspicious, and we see her put mace into her purse. Once inside, Michael locks the door as Michelle picks up the phone, only to hear a busy signal. For her, this confirms that Michael is up to no good and she makes a break for it. Michael tries to warn her, but his speech impediment is hindering his ability to do so, and she sprays him with mace. She then uses the phone to break the glass and escape. She runs back to the car as Michael continues to try to warn her. As she drives away, he yells that someone is in the back seat. As Michelle drives away, we again hear a Total Eclipse of the Heart playing, specifically the "Turn Around" lyric. As lightning flashes, we see a silhouette of a person rising in the back seat. Michelle finally sees the figure, but it's too late. She's hit with an axe. This opening scene is fantastic, and it plays on the killer in the back seat urban legend. This legend originated in the late 1960s and usually involves a woman driving who is seemingly being harassed by someone following her. In reality, the pursuer is actually trying to warn the woman that someone is in her back seat. This trope has been used in other films and on television, but you'll be hard-pressed to find one that does it better than this opening. We again hear Sasha on WZAB, and she's talking to a student who is reluctant to tell her story, so Sasha tells her to spit it out, to which the caller replies, "That's the problem, I didn't." Sasha then asks the caller if she's had a little frat boy protein shake. The caller asks if she should get her stomach pumped, and Sasha goes on to tell her that ingesting bodily fluids is a major safe sex no-no, and advises her to drink some Pepto. This is a somewhat loose reference to the promiscuous cheerleader urban legend. The actual urban legend has a bit more, shall we say, volume than what is described by the caller, and since we're on YouTube, I will let you do your own research there. We transition to the university coffee shop where we meet our final girl, Natalie, played by Alicia Witt. She's with her friends Parker and Brenda, played by Michael Rosenbaum and Rebecca Gayheart, respectively. Brenda is, of course, the killer, so let's go ahead and get that out of the way. We get a glimpse of Jared Leto's character Paul as Brenda tells Parker to finish the story about Stanley Hall. He goes on to tell a story about a professor who went berserk 25 years ago and entered Stanley Hall with a hunting knife. The professor then proceeds to knock on every door and kills anyone who answers. Once the killing spree is over, the professor stabs himself in the heart. This event is now commemorated in the annual Omega Sigma Phi Bash. I wasn't able to find a direct reference to an urban legend for this, but it seems like a mashup of different urban legends, including the killer who knocks, the professor who snaps, the hatchet man, and so on. At the end of the story, Paul chimes in to call it bullshit and says it's a story that you hear at every campus in the Northeast. Parker pushes back and says that there was a vast conspiracy to cover it up. We eventually find out that's true, so good job, Parker. We cut to Natalie and Brenda walking past Stanley Hall, and the pair is still discussing Parker's story. Brenda asks why they haven't torn the place down, and Natalie tells her it's because the story isn't true. Brenda says that the story was half the reason she transferred to Pendleton, which I took as a very subtle hint that Brenda is the killer. They then decide to do the Bloody Mary ritual at the entrance of Stanley Hall. I'm fairly certain it only works if you do it in front of a mirror, but whatever. For those who don't know, Bloody Mary is the legend of a ghost who is said to appear in a mirror if you chant her name repeatedly. When I was growing up, you had to say her name 5 times, but it varies from place to place. They begin to hear wailing and screams coming from the hall, and this is when we meet the movie's resident douchebag, Damon, played by Joshua Jackson, who is apparently really good at throwing his voice. He's also wearing a Killington Snowfest shirt, which will come into play soon. Natalie makes her way back to her dorm, and as she approaches, we hear industrial music emanating from the room. She opens the door and turns on the light, and she's immediately met with her goth roommate Tosh, played by Scream Queen Danielle Harris, in the throes of passion and is told to turn off the fucking lights. The lovin' continues as Natalie drifts off to sleep. The next morning, Natalie and the gang are in Professor Wexler's folklore class. Wexler is played by the GOAT, Robert Englund, and if you're watching this channel, I'm going to guess that I don't need to introduce him. A couple of urban legends are referenced in this scene. First, Professor Wexler details the classic babysitter and the man upstairs. This is another legend that dates back to the 1960s and usually involves a babysitter who receives phone calls that ultimately turn out to be coming from inside the house. This plot device has been used in a bunch of films, most notably Black Christmas, which is great. Next, Brenda is invited to the front of the class and is asked to eat Pop Rocks and drink soda, but she refuses. This is a reference to the Little Mikey urban legend. Long story short, Mikey was a kid in the Life cereal commercials from the 1970s. Somewhere along the way, a legend was started that Mikey died after his stomach exploded from mixing Pop Rocks and soda. This, of course, never happened, which Professor Wexler points out by showing a picture of a grown-up Mikey. After Brenda won't do the Pop Rocks, Damon volunteers and fakes dying, because he's a douchebag who does douchebag things. Cut to after class where we see a newspaper stand. The paper on display has a headline that reads "Lunatic on Campus." This is when we meet campus police officer Reese, played by Loretta Devine. She is confiscating all copies of the paper at the behest of Dean Adams. The story is about the death of Michelle from the opening scene and was written by Paul, who confronts the dean about the removal. The dean tells him that the only lunatic on campus is Paul himself. If you look towards the bottom of the newspaper, we see that men's hockey advanced to division final, relax, get used to coffee, which is definitely a typo, and drama league mounts Macbeth. We're taken back to the coffee shop where we see Sasha, Parker, and the rest of the group watching a news story about Michelle's death. In it, the anchor says that the proprietor of the gas station is missing. This is when we learn that his name is Michael McDonald. On a side note, the news anchor's name is David Macquarie, which is the name of the first assistant director for the film. Sasha says that someone told her that Michelle was listening to her show when she was killed. On rewatch, I realized that this was a pretty big clue to who the killer is. Stay with me here. We know that Michelle was alone except for the killer. So that means that either Sasha is the killer, or the killer either told her directly and she forgot, or the killer told other students and word got back to Sasha. Either way, with this reveal we can narrow it down to a student. Because this is a movie, it's not going to be a student we've yet to meet. That narrows it down further to the friend group. That gives us Sasha as a candidate. If not her, I would assume that Sasha would remember if Parker told her since they're dating, so we can cross out Parker. That leaves Damon, Brenda, and Natalie. Natalie is the main character, and while it definitely could be her, I would argue that it's unlikely. That gives us Sasha, Damon, Brenda, and let's throw in Paul as potential killers up to this point in the movie. Douchebag Damon says he's fine with a killer on campus because he's going snowboarding at Killington that weekend, setting up his murder and disappearance. Now, back to Tosh on a website called Goth for Goth, which is the most 90s website you'll ever see, and I love it. Natalie enters and apologizes for interrupting the lovin' from the previous night, and she picks up a pill bottle containing lithium prescribed by a Dr. Breen, C, which is a nod to the movie's production designer Charles William Breen. Natalie gives the pills to Tosh and picks up the phone to check her messages. She's met with the glorious sound of dial-up internet. For those who didn't live through that era, we old people had to use telephone lines for the internet, and you couldn't make a phone call if somebody was online. Although even in 1998, I would expect that a university would have something faster than dial-up, but I digress. This is when we learn that Michelle and Natalie were team captains on the cheerleading team in high school at Mountain Lake High School. Douchebag Damon drops by and invites Natalie to the frat house, and she declines. He says that they can do something else and claims to be a good listener, and Natalie agrees to go somewhere and talk. When they get in his car and he starts it up, the song I Don't Want to Wait by Paula Cole is blasting from the stereo. This was the theme song to the TV show Dawson's Creek, which starred Joshua Jackson. I also saw this as another ploy by Damon to seem sensitive. It makes me wonder how many times he's tried this. They park somewhere secluded, and Natalie tells Damon that she had been friends with Michelle, but didn't want to talk about their falling out. Damon continues his sensitive guy charade and says his girlfriend died from a quote-unquote syndrome. Natalie, not being a complete idiot, quickly catches on and punches him in the face, which might be the best thing in the whole movie. Damon goes to take a piss and is attacked by the killer with a noose. The killer then confronts Natalie, who runs to the car. This plays into the killer's plan, and they connect the rope from Damon to the car. Natalie floors it, trying to get away from the killer, inadvertently killing Damon in the process. This scene is a somewhat loose adaptation of the Hook or the Hook Man urban legend, specifically the variations that involve someone hanging from a tree. Next, we see campus police officer Reese watching Foxy Brown, a film starring Pam Grier whose character battles a group of drug dealers who killed her boyfriend. Natalie interrupts the fun, however, and tells Reese about Damon. Natalie and Reese drive back to the scene, and wouldn't you know it, they find nothing. Reese is dismissive of Natalie and asks her what she's on. Natalie is adamant that she's not lying. Reese finds a beer can on the ground, which makes her further dismissive. Natalie speculates that it could be the same killer that killed Michelle, but Reese explains that the gas station owner had been arrested that afternoon. Back at the coffee shop, Parker continues dismissing Natalie, saying that Damon is the best practical joker on campus and tells her that what she saw was a mannequin that Damon uses to scare pledges. Brenda asks Parker why Damon isn't there, and he brings up the weekend snowboarding trip mentioned earlier. Parker then claims that this is all from an urban legend discussed in class, which makes Natalie remember the man in the back seat legend and connects it to Michelle's murder. She proposes that there is a killer recreating these legends in real life. Before the scene ends, Parker mentions a couple of other urban legends. First, he references the spider eggs and bubble yum legend. This is exactly what it sounds like. There was a rumor that bubble yum bubblegum was soft because it contained spider eggs. Second, he talks about a gerbil up a celebrity's ass. I'm going to leave that one alone. Natalie then goes to a campus library and finds the Encyclopedia of Urban Legends. She literally runs into Sasha, who has happily found an early version of the Kama Sutra. The pair then flip through the encyclopedia and we see the roommate's death urban legend that has an illustration with "Aren't you glad you didn't turn on the light?" written on the wall. This will come into play very soon, and it's notable that Sasha was with her when she saw this. Keep that in mind. Next, they find the legend called the boyfriend's death, which is similar to what happened with Damon. Finally, they come across the gang high beam initiation. This is a real urban legend where new gang members are initiated by killing drivers of cars who flash their headlights at them. Of course, this happened with Natalie and Michelle in high school, setting up the events of the movie. Now we get a shot of Tosh making a post on the Goth site looking for guys to hook up with on campus. I guess Goth for Goth is a Pendleton University specific goth site. She connects with someone who says lithium is their thing, to which Tosh says that's her kind of guy. Back to Natalie looking at who had previously checked out the encyclopedia. We see it was authored by Charles S. Breen, who was on the lithium bottle from earlier. I also spotted Colin Jones, who was a boom operator, and Tom Mather, who was a sound mixer. We also see that douchebag Damon checked it out as well. Tosh is still chatting and making plans to hook up. She asks what room the person is in before leaving briefly. When she returns, she sees yours as a reply and is then attacked. Natalie enters the room during the attack but just assumes that Tosh is in the middle of some more lovin' and goes to sleep. The next morning, Natalie wakes up to find Tosh dead with her wrist sliced. Written in blood on the wall behind her is, "Aren't you glad you didn't turn on the light?" just as she saw in the book. I believe this was the writers trying really hard to make us think the killer was Sasha. While we're here, I want to mention that the timing here is hard to reconcile. Was it just a coincidence that Brenda used the same urban legend to kill Tosh minutes after Natalie had just read about it? How would she have known? If Brenda was somewhere in the library spying on Natalie, how could she have been chatting with Tosh on the goth site at the same time? I know what you're asking. Matt, it's just a silly slasher. Why can't you just enjoy it? To which I reply, I think this movie is great, but holes I will poke. Natalie is then seen talking to the dean and Reese. She's asked by the dean why she didn't turn on the lights when she heard moaning, and she explains that she'd walked in on Tosh having sex before and didn't want to see it again. Reese asks if she actually saw someone other than Tosh, and Natalie said that she hadn't, but that she sensed someone was there. They explain that Tosh was manically depressed, and all of this was just a with the bloody words on the wall being a morbid note. Paul approaches Natalie wanting to do an interview. She thinks he just wants to talk about Tosh, but he's actually dug up the connection between Natalie and Michelle. He asks why she didn't say something, and she explains that he would have just exploited her death more. She tells Paul that Michelle, Tosh, and Damon were all murdered. Paul offers to talk to her off the record. In the newsroom, Paul is reading the urban legend encyclopedia and tells Natalie that an urban legend serial killer is a bit of a stretch. He asks if it's true, why now? Natalie points out that tonight is the 25th anniversary of the Stanley Hall massacre. Paul reiterates that the story isn't true, and Natalie asks him if he's sure. The pair then go to the newspaper archives, but they're unable to find the archive for 1973. They ask a janitor who's cleaning nearby if he knows anything about Stanley Hall, and he denies having any knowledge. They press him, and he eventually tells them to talk to Wexler, the folklore professor. They take his advice and head to Wexler's office. He's not there, so they break in and start poking around. Natalie finds a secret door to a secret room, which everyone has in their office, and is jump scared by the coat that is all the rage on campus apparently. Inside the room are various creepy things, including an axe. They hear Wexler return and hide inside the secret room, poorly. As soon as they step out, Wexler is there waiting. Next, they're in the dean's office after having accused Wexler of being the killer. Wexler explains that the axe is just a prop he uses in his folklore class. Paul asks Wexler to explain the Stanley Hall massacre, which gets both Wexler and the dean's attention. The dean then asks for a moment alone with the two. The dean says he's looked through Natalie's file, and we learn that she had probation for reckless endangerment. Paul is then told that he's been fired from the paper. Outside, Paul confronts Natalie about the reckless endangerment charge, and she says that it was in high school and she doesn't want to talk about it. Natalie makes her way to the swimming facility, and we see Brenda jumping into the pool. We pan past a TV where a weather forecaster is warning that a storm is on the way. Natalie watches Brenda swim from a room above the pool as a person wearing the ever-popular fur-lined coat walks into the building. Natalie is immediately alarmed and thinks that Brenda is in danger. She tries to exit, but the door she just came in is suddenly locked for plot reasons, so she bangs on the glass to no avail and ultimately decides to hit it with a chair. The mystery person takes off the coat, and she is just another swimmer. In the locker room, Natalie shares that she knew Michelle but hadn't talked to her in 2 years. She explains that one night they were together in Natalie's car. Michelle was driving and she wanted to play a prank based around the headlight gang initiation legend we talked about earlier. When someone flashed their headlights at them, Michelle does a quick U-turn and chases the car. The driver of the other car dies when he loses control and drives off the road. They both got probation, and Natalie never forgave Michelle. After this revelation, Natalie says that she's going home to rest, but Brenda talks her into going to the bash and promises not to leave her unless she hooks up with Paul. Speaking of Paul, we then see him packing his stuff from the university newsroom. The janitor from earlier has planted an old newspaper that shows Wexler as being the sole survivor of the Stanley Hall massacre. The article is written by John McNeil, which is the name of an assistant art director on the film. We also see the janitor peeking in to ensure that Paul found the paper. We then see the dean in a parking garage about to enter his car. He pauses to look into the back seat to ensure it's empty and shakes his head at his foolishness. Reese then scares the crap out of him as she comes up from behind and puts her hand on his shoulder. She wants to add extra guards for the weekend given everything that's happened. She also mentions that she's having trouble locating Damon. The dean immediately dismisses this and says that Damon is probably shacked up with a girl, or a guy, or a farm animal, and asks Reese if she was ever 18. This can only lead me to believe that the dean had some really wild days in his youth. The killer has been under the car this entire time and slashes the dean's Achilles tendons once Reese leaves. The dean tries to crawl away, but the killer puts the car in neutral and it eventually runs him over, impaling him on spikes meant to slash tires. This is a reference to the slasher under the car urban legend. This one generally involves a person hiding under a victim's car, slashing their ankles, and then robbing them. Now we're at the bash and everyone is having a good time and giving dogs alcohol. We hear the song Love Roller Coaster by the funk band Ohio Players, and this prompts a student to tell Sasha that the scream heard in the song is an actual recording of a woman being murdered. This is a real urban legend surrounding the song, but in reality, it was band member Billy Beck making the scream-like sound. Natalie makes her way through the party and is greeted by Brenda wearing a masquerade mask. Brenda goes to grab Natalie a drink, and then Paul appears behind Natalie and shows her the paper. Upstairs, Paul explains that Pendleton covered up the massacre and essentially gave Professor Wexler a job for life as long as he keeps quiet. To both of them, this is further proof that Wexler is the killer. Paul speculates that around this time each year he goes a little wacko, but this year is off the charts. Natalie wants to tell the police, but Paul explains that the dean told the police to expect prank calls and that their names had specifically been given. They eventually kiss, and Brenda comes back just in time to see it happening. She is livid and storms off. We then see Reese investigating Wexler's office. It's completely wrecked, and she finds an open window. She eventually slips on a pool of blood. Meanwhile, Paul tells Parker that he should consider ending the party a little early, explaining that Natalie was right. Parker stops the music and makes Paul explain to the crowd why the party should end. He tells them that there's a killer on campus and everyone thinks this is just hilarious. Parker mocks Paul, who tells Natalie to stay at the party while he finds help. Sasha also leaves to go back to the radio station. Parker then takes a phone call. The person on the phone tells him that he's going to die tonight. Parker looks at the caller ID and thinks that Damon is pranking him. He asks the caller if this is the babysitter killer urban legend, to which the caller replies, "This is the one about the lady who dries her wet dog in the microwave," which again is a real urban legend. Parker goes ballistic and throws up in a bathroom. Inside, he's attacked by the killer. The killer ties him up and force feeds him Pop Rocks and drain cleaner. Yummy. A quick detour back to Reese, where she's on the phone with police trying to tell them about her findings in Wexler's office. She's told that because of the storm, all units are responding to calls and is told to hold. We now hear Sasha talking to a couple stuck in a sexual position. This is referencing something called penis captivus, and again, I'll let you do your own research there. While Sasha is talking, we can see the killer attacking someone behind her. Conveniently, the power goes out right as this happens. The killer then attacks Sasha, and her screams can be heard on the sound system at the party. This is a clever callback to the Love Roller Coaster scream. As she screams for help, Natalie rushes to save her. Sasha does an admirable job of evading the killer, but alas, she is killed right as Natalie reaches the building. The killer then slyly waves at Natalie. Natalie runs to Paul's dorm and asks where he's been. He says that he's been running all over campus trying to find help. The storm has knocked out the phones and no one can be reached. Natalie is suspicious of Paul and checks the phones to make sure they're actually dead. Outside, the pair run into Brenda. She asks what's happening and claims she heard Sasha screaming. The three of them run off. Meanwhile, Reese finds Sasha's body at the radio station and tries to reach the dean. In Paul's SUV, the trio are on their way into town to get help. Natalie asks if anyone smells anything, and Paul says that he doesn't. Brenda suggests stopping at a gas station to see if their phones work. While Paul is in the gas station, Brenda apologizes for how she acted when she found Natalie kissing Paul. They hear a phone ringing and investigate. They find Wexler's body, and Brenda plays up that Paul is the killer. They run off with Paul chasing them. During their dash in the woods, Brenda falls and we can hear her scream. Natalie eventually makes her way to a road where she stops the janitor who happens to be passing by. He gives her a ride and offers her a coat. For all the kids playing at home, can we guess what coat it is? Yeah, it's the killer's coat. This understandably freaks Natalie out. They come across Paul's SUV with its headlights off and the janitor flashes his lights. The SUV does a U-turn and drives the janitor off the road, but Natalie manages to escape. Before we continue, I want to make sense of this. Brenda somehow kills Professor Wexler and lugs his body to Paul's SUV. The three of them just so happen to decide to drive to town for help. Brenda gets Paul to go inside the gas station so she can be alone with Natalie. They find the body in the back, and Brenda uses this to make Natalie think Paul is the killer. They run into the woods where Brenda fakes being hurt. She doubles back to the gas station to get Paul's SUV. She correctly predicts that Natalie will be picked up by someone, and then decides to do the old headlights trick. Anyway, back on campus, Natalie hears Brenda screaming from Stanley Hall. She finds a way in, and we hear Brenda screaming that he is going to kill me. Exploring the house, Natalie opens a door only for Parker's body to fall out. She then finds the dean's body on a bed. Okay, this will be the last time I do this, I promise. How did Brenda get Parker's body to Stanley Hall without no one at the party seeing? You can make the case that the dean was alone and she somehow plucked him off the spikes and under the cover of night got him to Stanley Hall. But I'm not buying Parker. That is where I draw the line with this fun movie from 1998 that should not be taken seriously. Oh, and douchebag Damon is hanging around also. Natalie finds Brenda in a candlelit room lying on a bed and assumes she's dead. Behind her, however, Brenda does her best Undertaker impression and knocks Natalie out. Natalie regains consciousness and sees Brenda wearing the coat. She's tied Natalie to the bed and Natalie calls her crazy and asks why she's doing this. Well, it turns out that the man who died from Natalie and Michelle's prank was Brenda's boyfriend. His name was David Evans. The two had planned to get married after their high school graduation. Because David was killed by an urban legend, Brenda decided to get her revenge in the same manner. For Natalie, she's planned the classic kidney heist. Like most of the legends mentioned here, there are variations to this, but in this one, a traveler wakes up in an ice-filled bathtub and discovers that one of their kidneys has been harvested by organ thieves. The kidney is then usually sold on the black market. Brenda's plan to get away with this is to frame Wexler. He goes nuts and kills kids in the same fashion as the urban legends that he teaches. In her mind, this is a fantastic plan. I said I wouldn't poke any more holes in the plot, so let's move on. As Brenda begins to kill Natalie, Reese interrupts her. Brenda slashes at Reese with a knife and she drops her gun. Brenda wrestles the gun away from Reese and shoots her. Brenda holds Natalie at gunpoint. She's reluctant to shoot her in the head because that's not an urban legend, but she decides she will for the sake of time. Brenda believes that once Natalie is dead, a grieving Paul will fall in love with her. It's at this point that Paul shows up with a well-timed slow clap. He tells Brenda that her plan is great and is just what he needs for his comeback. He needs just a few details from her so he can tie it to Wexler. She seems intrigued and Paul asks her to give him the gun. She doesn't fall for it and tells him that he's cute, but he's not that cute. Brenda debates on who to kill first when Reese comes back from the dead and shoots her in the arm. She drops the gun and Natalie picks it up. Brenda then rushes her and Natalie shoots. Like Michael Myers before her, Brenda falls out the window and disappears. After checking on Reese, the pair are driving away in Paul's SUV. They're discussing how this event will go on to be an urban legend. Paul asks if this is an urban legend, when do we get to the twist? Right on cue, Brenda rises from the back seat with an axe. A struggle ensues as they race down the road. They struggle until Paul hits the side of a bridge and Brenda is ejected from the car and lands in the river. We see her body floating away. To end the film, we cut to a new group of students at a college called Ashton. They're in a coffee shop and one of the students is telling the story of what we just witnessed. He claims that it happened at Ashton and his group of friends call it bullshit. The storyteller then asks if anyone believes him and someone speaks up claiming that they do. It's Brenda, who says he didn't tell it right. She begins to tell the real story and we fade to black. And that does it for Urban Legend. The film came out in the wake of Scream and I Know What You Did last summer, and while it doesn't reach the heights of those films, I really do think it holds its own. I'd love to know what you think, so let me know down in the comments. While you're there, tell me what film you would like for me to break down next. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.